Everybody. I am Andrew Ike, the Chief Executive Owl at OwlchemyLabs, and this is our accessibility stream. I'm supposed to say this is a cozy, candid talk all about accessibility. And so we're going to be chatting with a bunch of great folks. So I'd like to introduce them right out the gate. I'd like to start with Vincent. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Vincent, co-founder of Trebuchet, and I am also creative director on the Prison Boss game series, so both Prison Boss VR and recently Prison Boss Prohibition. And I'm also accompanied by Médéric, my esteemed colleague.
So go ahead and introduce yourself while we're at it. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Médéric, marketing director at Trebuchet, and been dabbling with VR for some time, but I've been like deep in this industry for about a year now, and it's one that I love, really.
Wonderful. Where'd you come from? If you don't mind me asking, where'd you come from before VR?
Indie games. Started in indies, went to dabble a little bit in AAA and see how they do things, which was hard. It was a hard few years for my soul, and came back to the indies after, which was very soothing, very important and necessary.
Yeah, I understand that as a indie developer, and then worked for a lot of large companies. So yeah, but it's good. I think it's good to see kind of how the big places work, because some of that, like, you don't want to take all of it, of course, but some of the regiment that they bring is important to know. Like, okay, that either that exists and we're choosing not to do it, or like, hey, we should grab some of that. Like, they're not
Absolutely.
they build huge things. Like, maybe we should see how they do that. So, real quick, I want to talk a little bit about Owlchemy's philosophy, and then we can have Trebuchets talk about their philosophy. But just like a little bit, like, what are we doing here? Why even discuss accessibility, and why does it matter? And so, I was at Owlchemy. I've been at Owlchemy now for officially 10 years. Before that, I was in board games and video games and government consulting and a bunch of other stuff. But years ago, we did a panel at Game Developers Conference, 2017. It was like 1 year in VR, the first year, and accessibility had always like interested us. It was something kind of like tangential that we knew about, but we had never really gone full into it. And we gave this panel, and it was like, this is the state of the industry, da 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 da. And then somebody came up who was in using a mobility device, right? It was like a very augmented wheelchair, and basically said, hey, how come I can't do VR, right? Like, of all the people that you've talked about, I should be the one that absolutely should be able to do VR, because I should be able to experience these incredible and amazing experiences, and I can't do anything with that. So then the studio, we took it on ourselves to dig into what's the state of accessibility. We came back with like a quick report in 2018 on that, and then we kind of started to chip away at it. So Owlchemy's motto is VR for everyone, no exceptions, right? And accessibility is a big part of that, and we've taken these kind of looks each and every year at doing we do like little accessibility work to add another brick to our wall, and then we kind of take these big shots at testing new features. So a lot of the way that you all see subtitles if you play VR games was the work that we did originally for Vacation Simulator. We did some low vision work on Cosmonious High to figure that out. So that's our philosophy, is like both pushing as we can uniquely do, right? We work with academic partners, and academia has a whole different and slower but more methodical philosophy. We kind of put it out there and see what happens. And then we truly believe in VR for everyone. And as Owlchemy has grown, and as we've done, we brought folks on like Jasmine, who's wishes she could be here, but she's not. She's under the weather, so she would be hosting this show. Unfortunately, you get me. And then we have Pete, who does a lot of the actual programming of the accessibility stuff. And it's been a great journey. And the cool thing that we found is, like, it's kind of a library where as you build each thing, right, the next time you do, it's a little easier. So now, before we built subtitles, we never wrote down what the actors actually said. Now we actually put the subtitles in the game before we even do the voice acting and all that. So it's really interesting. Anyway, that's my spiel on why Owlchemy is here, why we're even discussing this. I'd love to hear similar from Trebuchet.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing your history along accessibility. I feel like we're kind of also been doing VR for a long time. We founded the studio in 2017. And we looked back then at things like the talks that were given by you guys, and also like we're influenced by how Job Simulator was like a great experience at first. And we wanted to make VR games because we felt it was just fun. And like we were the three co-founders of the studio. Me, Alex, and Guillaume were three game design graduates. And we didn't really play too much VR games back then, but we felt like this was like super exciting to design and develop those types of games. And at first, we kind of like had a journey that made us be not afraid, but like we saw the motion sickness as being like a key thing back then. Like motion sickness was on everybody's lips in VR, and we wanted to make a game that didn't induce any of that motion sickness for accessibility reasons. And we were very excited to develop a game using like the HTC Vive's room scale feature, and like thinking we're not going to have any locomotion. You're just going to be using your real body and like bend over under a table to like look at something. And this was kind of like our approach to like make the game as accessible to everyone in terms of like not making them want to throw up. And as years went on, we didn't want to live with that limitation of like not doing any locomotion. So we thought of like adding teleportation in our future games and everything. And we made like a jousting game for arcade that was called Jousting Time, where we realized that if you move your hand a lot as if you were holding the reins of a horse, and we made the people scream to shout, and it made the horse go faster. Then we had locomotion, and we didn't have motion sickness too much because of the intensity of what you were doing. And that was kind of like our first steps toward like trying something else and trying to like implement stuff. And in Winds and Leaves afterward, we used kind of like arm movements, but that were not like correlated as in like nowadays, like Gorilla Tag locomotion, you use your arms, but they actually impact the way you move in the field. Ours was more like an input method to say, I'm trying to move, and you had like stills moving forward. And we did like vignetting and this sort of stuff. But all of these like incremental things that we made in the development of our games, and trying to like evolve with also what was expected of the audience in the VR sphere, was also us just learning through the years and like trying to meet the expectation of the players. As like things at one point, like if you're not having like a stick locomotion with different types of like turning options, and like this is a lacking approach in your like approach toward like designing and like presenting the game to the users. So for us, it ended up being something like in conjunction with the users and like listening to feedback, we realized that the approach we did back in Prison Boss 1, not giving any like locomotion, it was just straight up, you're in the room and you're doing stuff, was not trying to be accessible back then, was not really as accessible as also giving out other options, as if you have a small room, if you're not able to bend over, like you mentioned, like somebody who's like living and unable to walk around might want to play the game. So we ended up adding like a distance grabbing and like distance throwing of items in Prison Boss 1 like a year later. And we thought back on like trying to be less dogmatic about what we do with a game, like trying to say this is the way our game is meant to be played, and just trying to adapt to whatever feedback we have and open up our minds regarding like we're trying to propose an experience, and if somebody wants to play it in a different way than what we first thought of, we should be open to it. And that's a bit of like how we evolved also as developers toward like just being less, I guess, protective of like of whatever we're trying to make, and like just be chill about it with our audience.
I like that. I think the chill with the audience is a good way. It's interesting that you mentioned Prison Boss and locomotion that way. We've actually kind of in many ways boomeranged, right? So we started with Job Simulator, which had no locomotion. and then we went through the whole thing. And I kind of agree with you in that if you present a world where locomotion is a necessity or even a desire, you're going to have to address it, right? And when you address it, you're going to have to address it in all these ways because, I do think that motion sickness is one of our biggest hurdles we still have to overcome as an industry, especially, Gorilla Tag is wonderful and that style of locomotion is great, but like I still know lots and lots of people who even after hours can't play it. We have data that says that we still have to deal with this. But I think there's an interesting kind of spectrum. And on one side, one of the things I've told developers recently is if your game isn't about locomotion, if locomotion isn't a key aspect of your game, see if you can condense the world. Because many times people are just using locomotion because they don't want to create like a tight space that has like lots of little drawers and stuff. They're just like, oh, we'll just put the stuff around a big room and you walk around. And that locomotion really isn't additive. So now you have to put all the magic sauce to get people around. And it's like, did you need it? Versus, a Gorilla Tag where it's like, hey, if you were to say you can't do arm swinger locomotion, right? The gorilla style locomotion, then there's no game there. So when we look at dimensional double shift, we actually went back to our roots, and there's no locomotion in that game again. But we have lots of little like drawers and stuff to pull out, and lots of things to experiment with. And we don't hear complaints from our players where they don't have the desire. Part of it is we put it in floating islands on purpose. We're like, guess what? There's nowhere to go, right? These people are coming to you. But I do think that's very interesting. And then, kind of along that line, what are some of the new, kind of new things you've been looking at as far as accessibility and new features?
Well, we've been listening to the community a lot. I think Prison Boss Prohibition is the most direct line of communication we've ever had with users, right? We always have Steam community, we have the reviews and everything, but it's the first time we have. It's not true. Broken Edge was our first, but Broken Edge was kind of the opposite of accessibility in terms of design. I don't know if you've played Broken Edge, but it's a sword fighting game. It's competitive, and movements are pretty intense. But when I look at people playing this game, I don't feel like accessibility exists in this kind of game. But when we went through Prison Boss Prohibition, we added so many things after just opening up this Discord and having the community play the alphas and playing the game before it was ready. And it's been what we had been 3 years inside, like designing and doing things, and then you just give it to people and they're like, oh, we need this and that and this and that, and you're like, wow, we thought this wasn't less important, but we've been adding things every week almost.
So like, what's an example of something? I think these are always great. What's an example of something that you were like, I don't know, I don't think this is really important, and the community was like, no, you got to do this?
Yeah, I'd say the locomotion at all is like something like the game. We thought we're going for like a quest first mentality, and like quest is like there's no cable and everything. You can put it anywhere. You can even play outside. So we thought, let's go back to like room scale. We're gonna adjust the size of your shop to like their boundaries. You're gonna be able to play in mixed reality. There's like all of these cool stuff. But then players, as soon as we started doing like the open alpha things, they were basically saying, where's locomotion? My room is so small, I can't like do whatever you guys want me to be doing. And we knew we were going to put locomotion in like either teleportation or some sorts of stuff at the finishing stages of development. But as soon as we wanted to have users interact with it, that became priority one. And like also having like being able to grab, like we want the experience to feel very like tactile. So we didn't want at first to have like a distance grabbing, but we thought for grabbing stuff on the floor, we have like an exception where if anything that's like 30 centimeter above at the ground level has like a distance grab functionality that you can grab from anywhere. That was added because of the feedback of users, like saying like bending is hard and everything, and like those were things that just were bumped from like the backlog that we're gonna do someday before lunch to like this has to become top priority. And having those implemented, then we had feedback on like the locomotion is too slow, or we want it faster or slower, and everybody had like their grain of salt that they wanted to put in. And we thought we've been like Mederic said, like narrowing down on our ideas of what the game is for too long, and it ended up shifting a lot of our priorities for things that we knew we were gonna do, but like more of an afterthought. And we ended up having to put them like front and center earlier. But I think it's great because honestly, like development being development, you're always late and you're always like trying to scramble to like ship the thing. And if we hadn't put these things in like higher priority, they might just not have been there at launch. So it's just amazing feedback that we got from the community and that we were able to implement and like set our priorities straight.
I think that's the thing that you learn about accessibility as you work, right? Is as designers, we're used to using an authoritative voice, right? This is my idea. This is my artistic vision of the game. This is how I want the game to be played or interacted with. Or that in accessibility, it's not the authoritative voice is actually a detriment, right? You don't if you tell players like this is how fast the text goes when you're looking at subtitles, or this is how fast you locomote or snap turn or those things, that's not accessible, right? That's not creating it. And so I think the balance that we as developers have to find, and we found this too, hint for future things where we're going to allow more customization, but is that allowing that customization, right, is what creates accessibility. And you have to ask, like, it was my artistic intent that people move at this exact speed, because there is a valid one where you're like, yeah, you're playing as a giant mech, so you don't get a locomote fast. You have to locomote slow. But if your game is not about piloting a giant mech, right? It's about, being in a prison, right? So like it's really kind of that push and pull, and we find the same thing. Speaking of player spaces, I think player spaces are one of the bigger things that Owlchemy learned. We learned, when we started, right, and you all started, when you did the Vive, we were only allowed square rooms, right? They had to be perfectly square, 90-degree angles, right? And then Valve added support for, off angles, but it was still 4 points. But one of the biggest things we learned is just how many spaces, especially with the age demographic going down, there are so many kids that play sitting on the edge of their bed, right? And so sitting on the edge of your bed, you think is seated, but it's a whole different level of seated, because if you drop an object behind them and down and there's no snap turn, they can't put their controller or their hand through the bed, right? They can't. So there's just like all these unique things. Or like, we'll talk to a kid, we'll be like, why is your space like, like 1 meter by 4 meters? Like, that's a weird space. And they're like, oh, well, like I share a bedroom with my brother, and this is like the half I have. And if I step over that line, I'm gonna get kicked in the shins. Right. And it's like, okay, that's fair. So yeah, we learned a lot on that too. And that was like one of the things where like, Owlchemy, we came around to snap turning and some of those other things, because users need that granular control, right? Our players need that. And again, it's like, is we had to go back and fix Job Simulator. This is actually a good story about play spaces. So we had this thing in Job Simulator where it like looked at your space and it like fit the game into that space. But the problem is that back in the day when it was Vive, that made sense. But everybody now is used to recentering and moving and all these other kind of like higher level verbs that you can enact on the game. And our game overrode the recenter algorithm. And so it would just ignore it. And so we had to go back and add that in and allow that. So some kids with some, or adults who have unique spaces could access our game, could even do that. And that's like accessibility at like the highest level. And then we have things like floor hover and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, have you encountered some real doozy play spaces?
There were some.
We've had exactly this, a bug report where the user films and then closes the game, but you get a little glimpse of the room, and it's literally like a 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter space where there's space to play something. So it's impressive. You think they have space, everybody has space to play VR, but not. I don't even have space myself to play VR, so I have to find the right space and avoid hitting stuff in my place. But it's surprising because you think there's at least but some people play in very tight spaces, so locomotion makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's also like we find that the it's not necessarily the key demographic with like the audience being younger and like a teenager has like an infinite amount of energy, but like for us as like I guess older people developers, we realize that I have young 2 daughters at home, and my only like gaming time I have is like from 10 p.m. to midnight to like, and at that time if I want to play a video game, I have the option of like just moving my fingers on my computer to like play some flat game or like getting in the VR headset to play something. It just feels like it's hard to like have that level of energy at the end of your day, having done a ton of shit. And then we realized that accessibility also, like at first we thought accessibility was like not doing locomotion, like getting people up and like using their body, but this is like involving, and VR can also be fun and like something that is worth like doing as just like seated and doing like minimal movement. I guess not trying to like always turn about, like just like as if you are like in a couch and like you want to experience, you want to play, but you're not trying to do like the Sim Riders training or like you're not there for the workout. You're just there to experience something fun. So there's kind of like the accessibility of like giving players the option to just be like relaxed in VR at the same time as trying to propose something that's active. Felt like a learning that we did that resonated with us as we kind of like saw more player postures either through our own experience or like listening also to the audience regarding play space size and this sort of stuff. So we thought like we should have more of like chill experience, and like we had like ideas of like also maybe doing experience that you can play like literally lying down in your bed. That would be like fun things to do, and it feels like the antithesis to like what we thought of VR when we started doing this. I'm gonna put the headset and just be basically sleeping on my back, but it does feel like something that has like value and can be worthwhile to like have something to use and experience as the player.
Have you tried Lucas Risotto made a whole game that's supposed to be played on your back, and they would show up to conventions and they'd lay out like
Oh, yeah, I haven't.
Yeah. That's a pretty unique experience. Yeah, and I think just kind of the old curb cuts philosophy, right? It comes into play too. Is like sometimes the work that we're doing to make the game more accessible for specific communities is actually kind of helping across the board, right? And then mobility, I think, is one of the great ones. In terms of like every developer has a seated version of their game, and the reason why is they all sit in a desk, right? But when we talk to developers, very few of them had a one-handed version of their game because they always have two hands. So it's those kind of things that when we're looking at it, right? But then when we did the one-handed version of our game, what we found out was it automatically kicks into it when a controller turns off. That's how you activate it. And so it doesn't matter if you're one-handed, you could just have a dead battery, right? And it's very annoying if you played a lot of VR when like one controller goes and the other doesn't, and then you're swapping batteries and stuff. So it was like these kind of learnings that helped us better understand accessibility. Are there any other features you'd like to highlight? I think locomotion is awesome. We do a similar thing when you get close to the ground. We call it floor hover, where we basically just like bump all the items up to catch your hand because it's intent meeting action, right? You intended to reach down anyway. We get it. We're going to get you.
We've been also experimenting with hand tracking in the Prohibition, and like,
oh yeah,
that's a challenge. That's it's working well, but like for us, it's kind of like learning the basics again, because like there's no like basically the approach we did is like remapping basically what would be inputs from the controller to like different kind of gestures, and not having like weird button input that you have to like make some choreography with your hands to like do something. So like keep it simple, but having this approach also limited the input we can use to grab something. So like our grabbing is basically done by looking at those four fingers and like closing them and opening them up. But it prevents us from like grabbing using the pinch motion, because we're using pinch for other stuff, like as in using raycasting with like pointers and things like that. But this feels like a new can of worms that we like worked on, that feels like, oh shit, I have to like learn to read and write again, because I don't know what the hell I should be doing with this approach. It feels good, but I would want it to feel like more natural. But you have to like do trade-off, and like we don't want to simplify. We want to be like the experience to be on par being multiplayer. If you're playing with hand tracking, we want you to be able to play with someone who doesn't, and not having like a simplified version of the game for you because you're in hand tracking mode. But at the same time, there's kind of a challenge there to like meet the inputs of the controller with like the inputs of hand tracking. We were able to do it and make it work, but it feels like really like going back to when we started doing VR and had to like learn on like the player can interact with basically anything and anytime and do a whole bunch of stuff that make you have a lot of dev time to support like recentering anytime or this sort of stuff. Other games don't have to worry about this, like if you're not in VR. But now hand tracking, that's also another world where you're thinking, shit, hands is complicated, and you have to account for a lot of stuff. And that's not also taking, the hands can be different, like somebody can be missing fingers or anything. We're not even in that realm yet. But it is complicated.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to the right company about hand tracking, right? We went all in for Dimensional Double Shift, but we started where you started, right? We had to figure out teleport and kind of some of those in where we did Vacation Simulator hand tracking, right? And so we did a mapping. What we inevitably created was a system that allowed a bunch of different grip types, and like the hint where you're all headed is there's like an IEEE paper that tells you that humans only grab things in 32 different ways, period, right? And the second you read that paper, you go, that's not right, you're wrong, and then you start grabbing things in weird ways between your fingers. And like the point of the paper is like, yeah, you can grab things in weird ways, but when you're unconsciously grabbing, you only use these 32 grips, right? And so we went and implemented that, and we went deep on that. But I think one of the biggest things we found, and you find it when you're doing the raycast pinch, but we took that raycast pinch concept, brought it close, and we do the bubbles, right? Please steal our bubbles. But the bubbles are a self haptic, and it's a button, so that way you don't have to have like this, like, to get into game dev talk, like different states, different UX modes that it operates in, where you're like, hey, this is like scudo grabbing, you pick things up mode, and this is like laser pointer pinching mode. We're like, no, you're either going to pinch a bubble on a screen, which is the same as picking something up, right? It's all that we just made that interface, but we made it look like an interface. And then to your point, right? So like the vision we've been trying to push to companies, and unfortunately, like platform partners all have different tolerances, I would say, for how much accessibility they're willing to put into their platform. Meta was good, and then it's it's public. They laid off like a bunch of their accessibility people. So like, what are you gonna do? Whereas Apple is normally really good. But one of the things that we want accessibility wise is we actually want to be able to pass gestures to like a larger accessibility provider, and then allow players to remap that however they want, right? That, because we keep getting asked in Dimensional Double Shift, why don't you just put controllers in there? And we're like, they're like, it's not accessible to not have controllers. And we're like, it's kind of a cop out in a way, right? We could put controllers in there. The experience would, one, be worse for it. It really is a hand tracked experience first, but that's fine. Like, meet the players where you're at. But two, we kind of want to put it back on platforms that like we should have some kind of interface, in the same way that there's like ARIA tags on the web where you just say like, hey, if there's an accessibility system reading this, like, this is how the screen reader should read this picture. This is how the screen reader should interact. This is an interactive element. This isn't. Why don't we have a similar thing where it's like, this is the grab gesture, and you can, if you map it to to this provider, then they can be like, oh, if I do A, it does this. If I do B, it does this, right? Or whatever hand signals hand gestures you want to do. And it's a little bit like kind of callous laziness that has prevented this from happening, because we've been pushing it for years. And then additionally, we always ask, we don't have a lot of folks testing, but we always ask, like, are you training the models that do hand tracking with like fewer than 5 fingers? What about no thumb? What about what about that?
Mhm.
And the question, the look we get back is like, but why? And it's like, I think you know why, right? So it's just been it's an interesting. We love hand tracking. We think it's very much the future. The good news is that there's now competition in the
Yeah.
space, and so that's going to be good. The other interesting thing is like that now we're going to get really in the weeds for like 2 seconds, and then each company has a different approach, and like all of them are should be converging hopefully someday, but aren't yet. And so like Meta has the best hand tracking because it like rebuilds your body. I don't know if you know about this, but it makes a rig of your body in real time and then tries to like deduce from the position of your body where your hands are. That's why your hands can cross in it, and that's why you can like pull behind your head and throw, because when you pull behind your head it sees your elbow and goes like, oh, there's an elbow, that must be connected to an arm and a hand. And then the Apples and the Googles of the world haven't yet figured out that they need to be running that. They're like, what? We provide you with a hand position when we could see it. And you're like, yeah, that's not, come on. We need more here. But yeah, love hand tracking, love where it's going. And I think you're going to find that for the majority of the world that doesn't play games and doesn't understand controllers, hand tracking is a very natural way that they would prefer to interact with things.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, to make it like natural, we have to like take a step far away from the approach we've been doing. As like now you have to, like, it's not necessarily complicated. There's a bit of natural aspect to like closing your hand, but like there's a lot of things in the game where you like take a pen and write on paper. You would never take a pen doing this. That makes no sense. So like there's this idea that we have to go more toward that, but we were very like it's rare that we have these kind of like wow moments again in VR, having worked in that field for like several years. But like since the game, there's a bit of like the Sims thing where like you buy furniture, you place it wherever you want, you like buy stuff, resources, you put them in. And when we were developing and trying the builds we developed, we were able to like close drawers because we also use like the physicality of the virtual hand that tracks when you're not grabbing stuff, and like close stuff out and like take the like close your shop manually with your hands felt like super immersive, and that felt like a new way to experience the game for us that's been working on this for years, and it felt very special. So we thought there are some setbacks that we have to like work around doing hand tracking and implementing it in the game, but there is definitely some gains there. Like you're not just you are maybe trading off a bit of like your fast pace actions that you can make. The game is also a bit like hectic, and how you have time limits. You're trying to avoid cops that pass in front of your shop. There's a bit of stress to it. So there is like this idea of like, if you're like a hardcore player that wants to be very good at the game, you might be thinking, I'm 15% less effective using hand tracking. So we're trying to maybe circumvent that or like work around this. But these things that you lose in terms of like efficiency, you're definitely gaining in terms of like just enjoying a VR game that like feels whole and like very present for you, even though in that case you can be playing in full VR, no like mixed reality or anything. And like it does have this feeling of presence that's just different. And like hand tracking has been in VR for like I guess 3-4 years now. It's not like not super new, but there's not been a lot of games. The technology has evolved a lot also in those years, so like it feels at a good point now, especially on the meta side of things, like with the tech that you mentioned. But I think, and I hope that we see more games use it and like take benefit from it and making the experience new and different. But it's sure hard to make like a gorilla tag movement in it. I would imagine you would because of like the snap moment to moment gameplay, that might be harder, but there are definitely something there.
I don't think it's as hard as you think for Gorilla, because a lot of the good Gorilla Tag players are doing long leaps, which I think helps, right? It's those of us who are old and bad that will struggle because they'll just be doing like the dog paddle. But I want to go back to that efficiency point. And this is my like light controversial opinion for this podcast, but I think we as a game community and game development community, we tend to prioritize our players who ask for efficiency overall. I think it's like something of like all of us dream of making esports money or something silly, and so we're like, yeah, we should make it efficient. But I contend that like experience trumps efficiency in almost every game. You even see in Counter-Strike 2 where like the one guy went through, there was a famous video where he's like, I made the map better for comp players, and it was like, yeah, you took all the joy out of it, right? Like there's now no soul left, so cool, I guess we'll put up a shooting gallery and see who's best, right? And so it's kind of like this thing where like I hear you, but like don't die over the efficiency. Like, how many players are going to even realize they're 15% less efficient, right? As long as it's not frustratingly inefficient, I think you're good. And how many people beat Dark Souls with like drum kit or guitar, right? I think a lot of the joy that we derive from gaming is presenting people with, interesting hurdles for them to overcome when they're trying to do things specifically in the most efficient way, in a way of playing that very few players do, right? And RNG is like, it's the bane of speedrunners, but it also makes for the most hilarious runs, right? The most entertaining runs. And it's like, at the end of the day, what are you making? Are you making something that's supposed to entertain and delight, or are you making something that's supposed to put a clock up and make people like, look, number went down.
I feel like that's a very interesting opinion, and like one thing that makes me ponder upon is like in terms of like development. I mentioned earlier, like we always felt we were being late in developing the game, and earlier on production, maybe mid-cycle, we implemented analytics in it, but we weren't able to maintain it as it was something we had to like let go to make sure like we had a lot of challenge with having a lot of different player posture across the board. We even have like collocated mixed reality play that you can play in the game. So having all of these things took a lot of time to maintain, and even today they're a bit too buggy to like be really enjoyable. We like had too large a breadth of player postures that we wanted to support, but analytics was something that got like unplugged, and we think that we sometimes prioritize the things that people ask about on like Discord, and those might be your more hardcore community, and it's good, like I mentioned earlier, it's good to listen to feedback and engage with your community over there, but having like analytics be present and looking at data that is interesting for you, like how many people are actually using locomotion, which types of locomotions are used more, what is like, if you're like, we're looking at the moment to implement like a Zen mode, because we have like players asking for like more hardcore, like you want to be able higher performing in the game, but we also have a vocal community that is asking to have like a more laid back approach, even like a creative mode, being able to like cheats in the game, and like we're kind of very much open and looking to support that. And we will implement like analytics back in the game to look at this data, but we might realize that the things we're doing toward the chill mode and chill approach actually have a higher audience and engagement because they're just more fun for a large amount of people. And I think that might be something that as game developers, we're more always not listening to the audience that is more hardcore, but we're also hardcore generally as like developers. We get too good at our game that we're either competing internally and like, look how good I am at this thing, I'm better than you, and so there's like this approach maybe makes us skew toward something that is anti-fun in the end and might just be against what is actually something that players want. And it's interesting thoughts to put it that way, because I think we sometimes have this bias of maybe going too much toward like efficiency and like high scores, leaderboards, and toward that.
I think that's why analytics is so powerful, right? Is like, and this is where we do ourselves, I think, a disservice as game developers, right? We'll change something, and it will go in the face of what maybe the more vocal group of the community would want, right? And you see this especially in comp games. But there was an analytical reason to do it, right? And so we just have to be better about like, hey, we're the majority of the players here are doing this. It's kind of like changes to the meta of games always cracks me up because you'll see players go like Super Smash Brothers, right, or whatever, right? They'll be like that character isn't viable, and it's like at the top, sure, but like, do you think you're good enough that you could actually affect this, right? That the meta matters, right? It's like somebody going out and be like, what golf clubs does the best golfer in the world use? And it's like, do you think that matters to you, or do you think that like you should just try enjoying this and enjoying everything about it? And I think that's a big thing that we're looking at is enjoyment. So yeah. So what's a dream accessibility goal you wish you could hit, but that maybe the tech just isn't there yet?
I think we kind of went over it a bit with hand tracking and like just standardization of like inputs and stuff like that. It feels like even as like major, like we're building our games on Unity, and there's always a lot of different stuff you have to do to support multi-platform and different approach that exists. And I guess it does take a bit of your time away from making the games to like, if you're doing something that's like, for example, hand tracking, you kind of have to like tweak and look at different approaches, even though what you're trying to do is the same in every platform. So I think that's something that is that we'd want to work better. What about you?
I think you hit one of the ones. I mean, one of the ones I'd love to get a better kind of, the tech isn't there yet, is like no vision, right? And it's not that the tech isn't there. We know generally how to deal with it, but the platforms, you can't even get into the game if you can't see, right? So we never were able to test that because we couldn't get people into our games, and there wasn't good support for that. Now I've seen Meta start to add some support for that. They're using AI, so it's a coin toss on whether it works or it hallucinates something, and we all live with the consequences. But it is a potentially like interesting place for that. And then, yeah, I want to see you heard me say, I want to see the platform tools get better. I think there's a statement that we have a lot of people for a VR studio, not for games. We have 80 people, right? So we could do a lot of things. But I think one of the things that's happened, right, is the accessibility pendulum swings in games, right? And we had this swing, and it was very pro accessibility, and now we're kind of backsliding a bit. And I think some of the backslide is actually not the fault of developers, but it's the fault of platforms and engines, right? Because when you democratize game development, that what's happening is the accessibility tools aren't built in. Unity has some, but they're not really there. Same with Unreal, right? And same with Godot, right? And so no one is sitting there putting the tools in. And then on the operating system level, right, where I'm complaining about, hey, hand tracking, we don't have this way to map this stuff. And so you democratized game development, but now these like army of new developers that have joined the industry have to build up the accessibility tools in the same way a AA or AAA studio has to, basically from the ground up, right? So we kind of at the top of the call, we're talking about some stuff. Owlchemy is a suite of tools, right? We have our own, framework to do all these different things, whether it's one-handed mode or it's, subtitles, or, kind of looking to make sure that we are good with colorblind, right? Motion and grabbing. But why do we have to maintain these tools, right? It just doesn't make a lot of logical sense. And if your goal, Unity's stated goal is the democratization of game development, well, part of the democratization is access, right? And it's getting in there. So my big thing is like, one of the things that we do, and you'll see this with hand tracking, right, is when you're an early adopter, we build a lot of systems to account for stuff. And then as time goes on, we actually get rid of those systems. So we had our own version of, nested prefabs, which is a famous like Unity concept. That's gone now because they built it. And so the goal should be that like, yeah, we're early, we build all this tech ourselves, and then we pick away at it. Either the hardware improves so we don't need to compensate for bad hardware, or the software improves because they've started to integrate all these wonderful features. And accessibility is just one where like it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back every time, right? Cool, we got text to speech, right? Or in Meta, but it's an online only API that you have to call, and you have a limited number of calls and all this. And it's like, but why did you even target that community? They don't need a synthesized, like, perfect, Alexa voice. They just want to be able to consume what's appearing on screen, right? And so, yeah, my magic wand would be like, please give the headsets the same level of TLC that you give to the operating systems. And the problem is that just requires some like vertical integration and communication, of which I have not yet seen the level of excitement necessary to kind of put that over the top. Maybe Apple, being very vertically integrated, will be able to push that forward.
Another thing I feel on that aspect, it's also like the VR industry has been through its ups and downs, and more recently it's been a bit harder, like because of the state of like the world in general. Like people have less disposable income and everything. We feel like people are it's a bit harder to get like performing games out there on the market. And I think when you're more like going around like just trying to survive as like a studio and a developer, accessibility is the type of stuff that gets deprioritized, because you're kind of trying to aim at the largest demographic you're trying to hit. And I think that's sad, because it is something that helps, even like as like it's the good thing to be trying to do, but it also, as we discussed, help the games to be better. And in the context of like, I guess, a bit more tougher times in the industry, I feel like this is something that's, I guess, more on the platforms to get to support, because if they want their headsets and their users to be like have a large spectrum of people trying games, it's normal for like indie developers just trying to hustle their way into survivability to look at the larger demographics that are active on there. So I feel like there's this kind of support that also needs to come from platforms. And ideally, I mean, it's a bit of an utopia in a way, but like if the platforms could also get together to create those standards, that would help. And it's not that accessibility has not been like mentioned or like put forward, but like I feel like there's this thing where in tougher times, it is the things that you don't get to prioritize as much as you should. So I think that's sad. As you mentioned, we were doing like a progress, I guess, toward that. And the suite of tools you mentioned, like it does feel like had it been implemented natively on engines or like at the platform level, that would just be better for everybody trying to enjoy VR games. But I feel like having those things not be there, having to develop these as internal tools, it's not possible for every studio of every size. We're also like, we've been there for a while, so we have some tools internally to help us, but maybe not at the extent of what you guys developed. And it does transpire in the games you've been like supporting on the market, that these accessibility thoughts are present and front and center.
Yeah, and I think to kind of dig into that point, right? Because I'm like pulling up documentation when we look at it, right? Like Unity does. This is where the vertical integration part's important, right? Unity does have like a module for accessibility, but it's meant to plug into the default iPhone or Android screen reader, right? And so if you don't have a screen reader on Meta Quest that's open and available, none of this matters, right? And so it like dead ends, right? You write it all in there, you do it, you hit go, and shouting into the abyss. And so, you know, we need somebody. And so, like, I actually do have a good story. So there's a guy I met, Larry Goldberg, and he worked at Apple for years. And but when he worked at Apple, he said that he went to, I think it was him. It may not be him. He may have known somebody. But anyway, they went to Apple, and Steve Jobs used to like just eat lunch in the cafeteria. And the person who told me this was like, you'd sit there and you kind of take your life into your own hands, right? You could go talk to Steve. I went up to talk to Steve, and they're like, hey, I want to, you know, like, the iPhone's not accessible. Let's make it accessible. And Steve looked at this person and was like, that certain things will just not be accessible to certain people. Sorry. Right. We've heard that. That was Steve. Right. And so you'd think that was it. And the guy took it as like, F you, Steve. I'm going to prove you wrong. And like, they made voiceover, and they made all the different accessibility controls and all those modules. Right. And so it just goes to show, right. It's like, as a larger look, right. It takes championship, but it also takes work. Apple can get away with it because they own the hardware, the software, the operating system, and everything, and the development environment. And so, you know, the problem we've always had on the game side, right, is we're always like 2 steps removed from the decision maker because we make it in an engine, and then that engine accesses it, whereas the app developers are like directly interfacing. And so if the app developers complain, they kind of get first priority. Also, Silicon Valley is perpetually embarrassed that video games exist, but that's like neither here nor there, nor a topic that we should be pointing. But like perpetually, like, can we just, like, you go and see any of the keynotes, and they're like, yeah, we made billions of dollars. Don't ask how, right? And you're like, yeah. It's so it's tough to have that kind of influence, you know. So yeah, how do you decide what you all ship for accessibility, when you ship it, when it comes out, or, you know, how do you make the decision that this is something worth going for, besides, you know, the things you've already said, analytics and community support?
It's really community driven, to be honest with you. Like, through Discord, we monitor, you know, of course, the usual ratings, reviews, comments on random videos. We try to go through, like, I try to go with my comm dev. There's not a lot of us, so we can't go through everything, but we try to get a general feeling on every kind of creator video to see, you know, if there's comments that come out more than others. That's one of the... I've been advocating for a Zen mode, creative mode in our game, because I see this everywhere, right? Too stressful, remove the cops, remove the time limit, give us infinite money, stuff like that. This is like a request that's been appearing everywhere. So in terms of wanting a more relaxed and laid back experience, it's pretty clear. Then in terms of those little changes, it's the sweet sport of balancing updates, bug fixes, accessibility features, and it's a small team, so it's honestly, it's really hard. We usually discuss it internally, put a weight on it, how much work from programmers. The thing is, if you think about it, all developers always develop accessibility features, not in terms of accessibility, but in terms of QA, right? You want to go through things really quickly. Your QA go through the game 50,000 times a day. They need quick ways to do it. They need easy way to do it. And you end up realizing that if you put like half of those features that they've made for themselves to go through the game faster, and you put them in front of consumers, and you have a nice UI for it, you've put a lot of accessibility in the game without having to code new things, because you've done them for yourself, and you end up realizing a lot of them are super useful for players. And
have you ever gone the other way? Because we've done that, where we put in we do this all the time, right? So there's this concept of complexity cost, right? And so QA has also paid the complexity cost. So we had like our original distance pass, put it in the game, and QA loved it. And we were like, analytics says nobody uses this. It's like very complicated. Once you figure it out, it's like super useful. It's very complicated. So we put it into it. So have you ever done the thing where you're like, sorry, QA, we're going to break the thing you loved, so because we need something simpler?
No, I think that we need to put more QA features to
That's
accelerate.
That's a good spot
things.
to be.
But I think like the the locomotion we did put, we mentioned earlier in the game, because it was like not planned at the moment it happened. It was basically the locomotion feature QA used in like cheat builds enabled that we thought we have locomotion, we can use it and it works. So we're just gonna like plug it into like bring in some limitations to it, prevent the players from like going out of the shop, have like fade to black if you put your hand in the wall, stuff that didn't had to be prioritized when it was just a QA feature. But that was the way we were able to have like a fairly quick turnaround on like having no locomotion at all in our release builds to like having something in. So I feel like this was something that ended up being like we're like stealing from features that we build for QA and like putting them in the builds. And like when we're talking about Zen mode and like letting players have like a creative approach, like we're just gonna like rework the cheat menus that we have in our QA builds that lets you spawn anything at any moment in the game, and players are going to be able to crash the software because they're going to have like 400 physical objects in their game. But we're thinking they're aware that they're clicking 400 times of the thing, and like they're going to have fun crashing the experience with it. So I feel like in our capabilities and like bandwidth, we're kind of stealing from the QA aspect to like put features in the game nowadays.
I have a good one though, Andrew. We just added 4-player co-op to the game. Good luck, QA.
Yeah. We actually added a single player mode, which was the other way. QA was like, thank God we could play the game by ourselves, because our poor QA game is always co-op, right? So two to 4 players. So yeah, that is it is a fun challenge, as we've
just
I was just gonna say that was something that also on our end, when we shipped the game was thought as like room scale, so it's like co-op, but you had like kind of basically your room alongside another player's room, and you could exchange stuff and like work together. And since we implemented locomotion, your locomotion was limited to your virtual room, because all of these things on like networking and like state authority of physical objects, where the design of the game was thought for something that was you're gonna get state authority for all the things on your side of the room, and since you have limited moments where you exchange, you're gonna transfer state authority, and the game feels very like single player in the sense that physics is snappy and like very responsive and everything. But like when we had locomotion, players were like looking at 4 feet away and said, I want to like use locomotion to go right there and like give the bottle to my friend. And we thought, shit, we have to do it. It makes sense. But like it made us have to like change all of the ways we did build our architecture for like state authority to like allow more granular exchange of state authority. Like you have basically, it's a bit like technical, but you have like kind of bubbles around your hands that make you request state authority on object as you like go in the other room. But like this request that was very simple, go over there, took us like 2 to 3 months to rework everything.
That's how we work too, right? Because there's magic in that area between, even though we have separate spaces. One of the other things we found, kind of the opposite end, right, in almost anti-accessibility pattern, is we had a number of kids where once they figured out that like we didn't stop them from running wherever they wanted to, they would go into their like garage, back into a corner, recenter, and then just run, right? And they would just run from corner to corner to corner. So we actually had to put like we took inspiration from like the Battlefield series, where like if you go out of like you can go out of your space, right? Like we don't want to discourage that kind of play. That's cool. But there was like an annoying trolling thing where like I could jump in front of your play space and just do all your orders for you. I was like very, so we put like a 5-second fade out. So you got 5 seconds to run, grab what you want, and get back to your space. But we have a different like nice developer name for it, but I always called it the Battlefield like countdown, right? Where you like fly your airplane out and it's like, get back to the battle or we're gonna blow you up. Yeah, so we still have some time. We're always ready to take questions. If there's no questions, then I'll just keep rolling, but question Q&A from the audience. While we're doing that, are there any like myths that we haven't covered that you all would like to talk about? I mean, I feel like I have a few like written down. It's like, accessibility only helps disabled players. We've kind of covered all of them, right? Accessibility slows dev down. Yes, but yes and no. I think that you all just talked about it, right? Like, sure, like us going and making, the like pinging system for visually impaired folks, that was slower, right? But that was a specific goal we set out to do. But a lot of your accessibility things are helping speed you up. But this is a good one. I want to hear from you all. We have hardcore players, but we don't really have time limits. But like, if you add comfort options, hardcore players leave. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I think that's a myth, I'd say, because I feel like I would imagine the players are used to seeing a breadth of like options, and like in the game you have you can play with like seated, standing mode, like room scale, or like mixed reality, and all of these things are valid way to play the game. But they also all like agglomerate toward a single leaderboard. So in a way, I feel like even though there's a different ways you can play, I feel like a real like speedrun hardcore player type of person should want to try them separately to see where they can get their highest score, instead of seeing them as like things that bring the fun of the game down in a way. Because for those hardcore players, the goal is to like be the top of the leaderboards. So yeah, I think we've not seen this type of discourse on the Discord at all.
No.
Yeah,
We're not competitive enough. But I do understand where they come from. Like the concept of, I've mastered this thing that was not built to be mastered easily, and then you give an easy way out for people who have not done it, and so they get frustrated because of that. But I guess that, I don't know. They people want very specific things. They prioritize their fun, but they don't understand sometimes that adding very little things can make an absolutely huge difference for others. So maybe at the end of the day, if certain players leave, it's a consequence it's part of the deal. Right?
Not every game for everyone. And I think with competitive play too, right? Like, we've gotten good as an industry in dividing it, right? And be like, look, if you want to play, there's different like leagues and styles and stuff like that, and there's different ways of doing it to not accidentally induce competitive advantage, right? If that's the specific thing. Will your hardcore players leave? No, we were literally just talking about Expedition 33, and there's like an auto do everything button in there, and like there's people on the other side who are like, no, watch me parry everything perfectly, not take a lick of damage, and just like do a 30+ minute battle. So clearly, right, challenge exists, and players will continue to find ways to challenge themselves. So yeah, I think one of the questions from the audience, I'll start with like a lighter one, because there's one that I do want to talk about, but there's I'll save that one for a minute. But any we fell down but kept getting up moments in accessibility dev, right? Our Chumbawamba reference here. But yeah, is there any times where you like maybe try to do something or did something, it was actually not necessarily what the community wanted? I think you kind of danced around some of these things, and then like, how did you like figure out where to go from there?
I think it's a journey. I mean, looking at the feedback we have from the community, I mean, the part where I guess we fell down is like not putting enough time in like developing those things that we know would be like a boost toward accessibility, and like also enjoyment, like not seeing accessibility as an isolated thing, just general enjoyment to everybody. And we have like the thing I mentioned earlier, as like in Prison Boss 1, you could like distance grab but also distance throw, so like felt nice. And now we're kind of thinking, oh yeah, we should have like developed this in the game, in the sequel already, but like we always have to like make a balance between like features, debugging, and like those are also like new features, but like accessibility. And I feel like this kind of dance is where we kind of we fall down, and like we're kind of frustrated at ourselves as like, why is everything going so slow? But it's also because there's a limited amount of thing you can do. And the game we made is a complicated game on its technical aspect. So there is quite a lot of bugs at launch, and still we did a lot of debugging, and like we prioritized this a lot. But going through these issues is something that's making us kind of be a bit of a letdown on maybe things that are actually very simple, but we cannot like prioritize simple things that are fast to do while there are critical blockers still in the way of the experience. So I think that's a bit of like how we feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, we still have sorry, Andrew, I just wanted to jump on it.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I feel like our locomotion, right, is our number one example. It was added late into the game, so it's still missing like basic things like vigneting, choosing the speed at which you turn. All locomotion-based accessibility settings, we're still working on them. Since we added locomotion so late, we didn't plan for like a lot of things around vigneting and snap turning and all those little comfort things that we want to add when you add locomotion to a game. We're still working on some of them, and it feels like we did give them some aspect of accessibility, but now it's missing what really makes it accessible, you know, towards like the I still get like I still get motion sickness when I play the game, when I do a lot of turning, because we don't have that vigneting. And we you know, it's all things we want to do, we want to put in the game, but like Vincent said, like those critical issues and then the updates, and then it's hard. So we still have some work.
I think we fall into the trap of pre-optimization a lot, right? So a little bit different because we are very accessibility conscious, and we have a lot of folks who think about it, right? But we end up in these cases where we'll, you know, catch developers and they're like, we can't do that thing because it's not accessible outright, right? It's a two-handed interaction, or it's this or that. And instead of being like, no, that's our artistic intent, we want to do that, how do we make that accessible? How do we address the inaccessibility of this thing we artistically intend to do? It's like pre-optimizing your game. We just throw it out. And so a big push we have to do is to be like, it's okay to do these things as long as we have an answer for the accessible side of doing those things, right? And you know, otherwise you end up like watering down your games, right? I mean, we had a problem, you know, a similar kind of thing with like our games. We got so worried about people being like hurt or offended that we like cut all the edges off. And so you kind of have to be like, no, we got to push the boundary here. We got to be pushing the interaction boundary, but pushing the interaction boundary doesn't necessarily mean we're leaving folks behind, right? That's not at all what we're saying, right? I think racing sim accessibility is a great example of this, right? They don't sit there and say, oh, well, we can't, you know, put like slip on the wheels and this and that because there's people whose reaction times just won't accommodate racing. What they do is they build this incredibly detailed simulator, and then they go, okay, we can run it slower, right? If you just need the extra time cognitively to figure out what to do, you could still enjoy the race, right? And all of that. We're just going to run it at like, you know, half speed here, right? But you're still going through the same exact processes as everybody else. It's still just as challenging to you as it is to anyone else, and it doesn't dilute the artistic intent. And on that note, have there been moments when the need for accessibility went against what you personally wanted for a game, or a learning moment, you know, specifically a learning moment that expanded your understanding of accessibility? And I'll give an answer real quick. Is like, I used to feel like, you know, snap turning, right? And some of the like other things, even in games that don't locomote, right? That like, do we really need snap turning, or do we really need recentering, or those things? And that's where I've really come around on some of that stuff, is like, haha, get it? Just some of those, because, you know, like we said, even in the you're fully abled, right? You can't, like, the bed example is like, that doesn't involve a disability, but that's an accessibility problem in a way. But that same problem with the, hey, I can't reach behind me and grab the bed, is the problem of, hey, I don't want to physically spin my wheelchair around because I have to pull a switch behind me, right? And so it was kind of all of that coming together where it's like, oh, my insistence on perfect room scale got me missing out on something really important.
Yeah, I think on our end, like we mentioned the addition of locomotion in Prohibition, but one of the things we haven't mentioned is the fact that once we added this in and we worked towards letting players with locomotion enabled to like go freely in the room, is that one of the key aspects of like the image we had for the game was that it's a bit of like overcooked in VR in the sense where like, or more like a plate up, a similar game, but like you play together, it's chaotic, like crafting, shopkeeping type of fun. But having it tied to room scale ended up feeling like you're playing single player alongside someone else instead of playing together in actual co-op with them. And once locomotion got added in and we like let the players go freely around the space, it ended up having the promise of the game we had in our mind be actually like present, where before you kind of like did all your thing on your end and like basically just threw some money when the other wanted to buy more resources and didn't have cash. So like this idea that we had that was very part of the early days of like the pitch, the core concept of the game, we weren't living it up. We weren't like living up to it because of like our close-mindedness and like then accessibility, development of features like the locomotion and like turning mechanics, everything ended up unlocking the potential for what we wanted the game to be. So I think that's something that really pushed the game to be just a better title in itself, and that's thanks to the community's feedback.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, and we all we all get to learn like in the like most present laboratory possible, right? As we're like kind of like racing towards the finish here, I do want to pluck out one question. I want to talk about I want to talk about motion sickness as a prejudice in the industry, but I want to talk about it kind of flipped on its head, right? I think as time goes on, we're like we've become that famous, meme for selection bias, right? Where like the people who stay in VR are the ones who've kind of iron stomached through it, and I'm deeply invested. And Owlchemy is deeply invested in this being a mass media, right? And so I don't think we have good studies on this. I don't know, but I know there's two people on the call right now who've just expressed, myself, as one of them, have just expressed that like we can't overcome. I still haven't been able to overcome motion sickness, right? And I've done all the things. It's there, right? And there's things that help. Vignetting. I play with my one eye closed sometimes in the really high motion scenarios. I can't play Animal Company more than like 10 minutes, right? I get 10 minutes in and I'm just like, I'm laid out. And so I think if you go online, right, especially on certain social media, you'll see people go, just ignore those people, or it's not worth it anymore, or all the money's to be made, or like we used to think that VR legs weren't a thing and they're a thing, and now you could just ignore that. And I think that does a disservice. And I think even let's play the game of hypotheticals, even in the hypothetical where 99% of the population could get VR legs, which is probably not true, probably less, but 99%. I think it kind of falls into the same boat as skydiving, which is I am certain a large percent of the population can handle skydiving. I am also equally certain a large percentage of the population does not want to jump out of an airplane, right? Even though physiologically they could do it, physiologically they would survive. Physiologically, once they got over that hump, right? You just play a little and get up to sickness and turn it off, and up to sickness and turn it off. Once you get over that hump of like just fall out of the airplane once or twice, you'll be good. There's still a huge percentage of the population that won't do that. And so to tell our player base, like, you got to get a little sick, it, I think, does VR a giant disservice. And I think one of the problems that we face as an industry and with accessibility specific to vestibular system is not that these experiences should or shouldn't exist. It's wonderful Gorilla to exist. I actually have no problem with it. I think high motion experiences should exist. I think the problem is when the first thing we put people in is Deadpool or Asgard's Wrath, we have immediately turned off potentially a enormous cohort of people where even if they could get VR legs, they don't want to try because we haven't been like, hey, let's convince you on VR first. This is pretty cool. And then here's a thing, and you could try to do this thing to get not sick at it, and like we could gently guide you in. And if you just don't want to get sick ever, right, or don't you want to mess with that, then like stay on this side of the fence, right? And theme parks already do this, right? We already see this kind of self-segmenting, right? There's not a theme park in the United States that is literally just super high intensity roller coasters, right? They always have bumper cars and carnival games, all this, because they want to make sure that like you can rise to the level that you're comfortable with. And so the other people in your party or in your family that are with you, yeah, if they want to go get rocketed out at 70 miles an hour, and fly up a hill, they can do that and enjoy that. And that doesn't mean that you're just like sitting there holding their stuff. Anyway, that's my rant over. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on this, but like, I just want to put that out there.
I think it's very interesting. I feel like you're right that there's this confirmation bias that as years went by, the survivors of like the VR game market are the people that have like the more iron stomach kind of people. But I don't know, like without some sort of change in like the form factor of the headsets, I feel like the ones that could enjoy VR, like I have some friends that are like in their 30s, they have disposable income and they are gamers, and like having the Quest headset be as cheap as it is now has not convinced them to buy an headset. So I'm thinking those like weird gamers that are similar to me but like never went into VR, they're not gonna get into it, I imagine, at all. It's like not for them or their generation. And sometimes they even played VR once and they are stuck on the idea that they were like, it's not for me, I had motion sickness. So that's even worse, because like now they think there's every experience is going to give them motion sickness, which is generally false. If there's like an experience that doesn't have any locomotion, some people still have motion sickness in those cases, but they are a lot more rare. But I feel like there's this thing where like, I don't know how this user base that's not getting in VR that could enjoy it are going to start going toward it, with it being there for like several years. I imagine we would need some sort of change. Price point doesn't seem to be like the core issue. Maybe I imagine like AR types of glasses in like the 5-10 years would maybe like bring them toward something that's more similar to like spatial computing gaming. But I think it's complicated to see how to get them.
I think so I actually completely agree with this take. So there's kind of two things about the form factor that I think we need to address. And one of them is putting big goggles on your face is off-putting, and the more that we like dance around that, it's like it's just not, we can't figure that out, right? And even Apple's attempt to like show your eyes through was like cool but creepy, right? And with their lenticular lens. And so I agree with you, but I actually think that the future is closer than you think. I think if people look at, and not to plug our own company, but like Project Aura is like a Android XR headset that's coming out that looks like sunglasses, right? 70-degree FOV. And so I think as you get more towards that, like, hey, it looks like glasses, even with a cable, people will be better able to handle that. I think it's easy for us in tech and games to be like, we were socially stigmatized. Probably, I'm not going out on a limb here to say if you play a lot of games, you were probably not, the captain of your football team and in school, right? You were probably pretty socially stigmatized, right? I was a band geek, and so like it's not, like we've learned to be that embarrassment is not like a big deal, right? But like that's not a common feature of the population. The population does not want to sit on an airplane and wear a big chunky thing. They want to look like they're wearing sunglasses, right? And so I think you're going to see some of that. And then, yeah, I think we need to embrace like it's just friction. Then the last thing, though, I think one of the biggest accessibility hurdles that no one talks about in XR, and then we'll go to fun thoughts, is glasses, right? You're wearing glasses. I think I wear contacts because I like contacts, but also like I'm like blind as a bat, but like it's like this far in front of me. But also like, we shouldn't require people go get contacts or LASIK or something like that. And so the current industry attempts have been like, oh, go get a second set of prescription lenses, right? And pop those in your headset. But now your headset isn't shareable, right? Because now you have prescription lens headset not shareable, right? And so we really got to stop making, glasses wearers second-class citizens, which is extremely common. I've yet to see a headset like really figure this out well.
Yeah, and I feel like the irony of it is like once glasses become a popular form factor, I don't know how. I imagine it's going to be easy to have your prescription in those like future glasses, but they're not going to be shareable again, which is, I guess, less of a thing if it's actual glasses. But there's this thing as like, if it takes a few years for them to be able to make those like high-end screens be like custom made for your prescriptions, you're gonna have people wearing glasses not being able to wear the glasses that they would maybe want to. So there's this thing where like it's kind of it's simple. It's like a simple hurdle that I feel like we're not able to overcome. And like some of our developers have like glasses. Mine are like fairly small, so it's easy to put on the headset on. But others had like needed like wider lenses, and like it's kind of impossible for them to actually have the headset fit in, even with like the adjustable things. So I think that feels weird that we're not able to overcome that already.
Well, back in the day, they made like a pair of glasses for like developing nations where you could inject, and it had like a silicone thing in it that would change the prescription. And it's like, wait, why can't I just have the automatic? I'm spending what, like the Apple Vision Pro's $3,500, and then I gotta go to Zeiss and get lenses. Like, why can't I have the magic like variofocal lens that you go? I mean, all of us who've done the eye things, right? You go you see the little balloon, and it can figure out how to snap the balloon into place. Why can't I have balloon snap in my headset, right? With the optics, I got the top geniuses in optics in the world working for them, and they're obsessed with like, look at the new pancakes I've made, and it's like, okay, neat, but I still can't see anything.
I think we forget one big friction that we have right now for first-time users in the Quest is the first-time user experience. You open your Quest for the very first time, you get exposed to worlds mostly. It's very, very, very different than a few years ago. You bought your very first VR headset. You had like a very curated selection of games. Every experience was very tailored, very like detailed. They put a lot of effort in it, and now it's you pick up your headset, you wear it for the first time. If you don't have somebody that is used to VR with you, you might have a very special first experience in your VR headset. And I do still see nowadays posts or marketplace posts with VR headsets that I bought it, I spent a week in it, I don't get it, I'm returning it.
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise. Like,
right?
Horizon Worlds is a product that exists, right? As it looks like, it looks like a machine to like extract revenue from children, right? Like that's and I can't believe we're still doing this kick. But let's turn around. Let's end on a positive note. Let me not poke the bear more than I already have. So I think I'd like to hear from both of you two things. So either a message, a takeaway or message for like players or developers, and then one last thing is like, what accessibility feature in real life would you want today?
I think like something I'd say to players and developers is like to engage with like developers in general, especially in VR. Kind of everybody is an indie dev in some way. Like there's no like giant teams, or as soon as you interact with the Discord, like you're gonna get people from the team like seeing what you're referring to. So, and these things are not just helpful, but also like rewarding to have this engagement from like you're developing games for years, and like it helps us to have that feedback and to like be able to comment upon it. And sometimes like trying to work around your schedule of like shipping things in the game, we don't always have time to like engage and like respond and like write back and like to every topic, but we do read everything, and it does help us to see like what is the game good at and what do people like about it. So getting feedback as like just telling something you like. You don't necessarily want something to change in a game, but like just saying, hey, I just really like that part of the game, makes me laugh all the time. That just helps us to like make the game better for you as players, because we kind of understand better what you guys like, and like we are there to make fun things, and like having them come out as like fun for people and engage with us is something that is both fueling us to develop more games, but also like fueling us to make our games better, as we've discussed a ton.
Yeah, exactly the same. In terms of having like a direct line of communication, you end up realizing that you had a vision on certain things, the rest you were completely blind on. So having this is amazing. It's our number one tool for Trebuchet to have like a direct line of communication. But in terms of when you said your dream accessibility feature RIL, you mean like in real life, like?
Oh yeah.
If I could snap my fingers?
Yeah.
Teleportation.
Oh well, that's pretty.
I mean, it's the classic. It's the most boring one, but could you make the world more accessible anyway? With just I want to go anywhere.
That's
VR
true.
is kind of.
Yeah. I think it would be a localized teleport to put a cap on you, right? But you still be able to move very fast, right? Yeah, I don't need the bus anymore. Watch this, and you're gone. Yeah. I think my kind of closing thought here is for players, it's we hear you and make sure patience and empathy is always the biggest thing. Not necessarily empathy for us. I mean, ideally empathy for us, but empathy for your fellow players, right? Not all changes are for you, and not all changes are because of you, but we hear you, right? And I think for developers, the big thing about accessibility is it's always difficult to measure the ROI. And if what you're looking for is like, I need subtitles to make us X more sales, you will never be able to extract that. But what might happen is the more accessible you make your game, the more likely players are to return and come back and do that. And even in ways that you don't think, right? It's very easy to say like, wow, you spent, dozens of hours on subtitles, and like, was that really worth it? And then you go out and look, it's like most people have subtitles on all the time on their TV. So you're meeting the audience where they're at, right? Or you did all this distance pass or distance thing and it did that increase sales. And it's like, it's not always direct, right? It's kind of like marketing, right? Kind of sits in the background, but it's the culmination of it all that's together. And mine, before I thought about how OP teleportation was, mine is distance grab, the Half-Life Alyx, which we stole into Cosmonius distance grab. Like, because I would start to do that when we were working on it, because we'd be distance grabbing so many things. You just look and be like, can I just hold my hand out and like snap something and catch it? And you're like, yeah. You're like, I just don't want to do that. Although the world would be a bit more chaotic for it. So yeah, we're down to the last minute here. So yeah, let me just we'll wrap it up and head on out. But I want to thank everyone, especially our guests. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days, especially for a small dev team, right? It's a little easier for me to walk away. In fact, my employees are probably happy for it, like the boss is away. But thank you both so much for joining us, and thanks to the audience who is here, our players, other developers, just Twitch in general, and anyone who's watching this, right? We really appreciate it. We really appreciate doing these talks, love engaging, and love digging into it, and VR for everyone and accessibility. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great holiday.
Thanks,
everyone.
It was a great experience, and we hope people get to play a lot during the holidays.
Oh, yeah.